I am Anthony, 29 years old, and the day my parents looked me in the eye and chose a lie over their own son was the day I died. Or at least, the version of me that craved their love died. Before I tell you how I ended up holding their fate in my hands 13 years later, do me a favor. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It is amazing to see how far these stories travel. It started with red and blue lights. If you have never sat in the back of a police cruiser, let me tell you the plastic seats are hard, cold, and they smell like stale sweat and industrial cleaner. I was 16. My wrists were handcuffed behind my back, the metal biting into my skin every time the car hit a pothole. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the scene playing out on the front lawn of my high school. My brother, Jackson, was 14. He was crying. Not the silent, terrified tears of someone who made a mistake, but the loud, theatrical wailing of a child who knew exactly how to manipulate an audience. He was wrapped in my mother's expensive cashmere shawl. My father, Richard, had his arm around Jackson's shoulder, looking at the police officer with a mix of indignation and practiced charm. I watched through the reinforced glass. I couldn't hear them, but I knew the script. I had lived that script my entire life. Jackson was the golden child. He had the blue eyes, the easy smile, the athletic ability that my father bragged about at the country club. I was Anthony, the quiet one, the one who read books instead of throwing footballs, the one who worked a part-time job at the hardware store to save for a car because my parents said they couldn't afford to buy me one, right before they bought Jackson a brand new dirt bike for his birthday. That night, Jackson and two of his friends, Brandon and Kevin, had broken into the school administration office. They weren't just pulling a prank. They were looking for the petty cash box kept in the principal's safe. They found it, smashed it open, and took the $300 inside. But they didn't stop there. They vandalized the trophy case. They spray-painted the walls. I was there because Jackson had called me. He panicked when the silent alarm tripped. He called me, screaming, begging me to come pick him up before the cops arrived. Being the responsible big brother my parents always demanded I be, I ran. I ran all the way to the school, panting, terrified for him. I got there at the exact same moment the police did. Jackson saw the lights. He saw me, and in a split second, he shoved the crowbar into my hands and ran toward the officers, hands up, screaming that I forced him to do it. Now, sitting in the cruiser, I watched my mother, Eleanor, point a shaking finger at me. She wasn't pointing at me to say, "That's my son. Please be gentle." She was pointing at me like I was a monster. The officer opened the door and hauled me out. My parents were waiting by their sedan. They didn't look at me. They looked through me. "We are so sorry, officer," my father said, his voice dripping with fake humility. "We've had trouble with Anthony for years. He's troubled. A bad influence. We tried to keep Jackson away from him, but he dragged his little brother into this." I stood there, stunned. "Dad?" Jackson called me. "He has the cash in his pocket right now. Stop lying." My mother snapped, her face contorted in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was hatred. She turned to the officer. "Officer, Jackson is a good boy. He's on the honor roll. He's the captain of the junior varsity team. Anthony has always been jealous. He forced his brother to be a lookout. Please, don't let Jackson's future be ruined because of his brother's sickness." Sickness. That is what she called my existence. The police officer looked between us. On one side, a weeping 14-year-old in a cashmere shawl, flanked by two well-dressed, respectable parents. On the other, me, wearing a hoodie, sweating from the run, with a crowbar in my possession when they found me. "We found the cash on the younger one, ma'am," the officer said. My heart leaped. The truth. Finally. Anthony gave it to him to hold. My father interjected quickly. "He threatened him. Look at him, officer. He's bigger, older." Jackson was terrified. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. They knew. They absolutely knew Jackson was lying. Jackson had a history of stealing from their wallets, but they always blamed the housekeeper or claimed they misplaced it. But this was a felony. and they were actively pinning it on me to save Jackson's reputation. Because Jackson was the investment. I was just the overhead cost. They managed to talk the police down. Because I was a minor and had no prior record, and because my father hinted at knowing the precinct captain from his golf club, they cut a deal right there on the sidewalk. Jackson would be released to their custody with a warning. I would be taken to the station for processing, and my parents would have to deal with the juvenile courts. The ride to the station was silent. I was processed, fingerprinted, and put in a holding cell. I sat on a metal bench for 4 hours. When my parents finally came to get me, it was 3 a.m. They didn't take me home. My father drove the car in silence. My mother stared out the window. Jackson wasn't in the car. They had likely dropped him off at home to sleep in his warm bed. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Quiet," my father hissed. We pulled up to the house, but we didn't go inside. My father got out, unlocked the trunk, and threw a black garbage bag on the driveway. "Get your things," he said. "You have 10 minutes. "What?" I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking. "Dad, I didn't do it. You know I didn't do it." My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, dead things. "It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do, Anthony. What matters is that the police have a report with your name on it. If this goes to trial, Jackson gets dragged in. His name gets mud on it. He has scouts coming to watch him play next month." "So you're sacrificing me?" I asked, tears finally spilling over. "For football. We are protecting this family," she screamed. "You have always been difficult. You're sullen. You're ungrateful. And now you're a criminal." "I am not a criminal. You are tonight," my father said, checking his watch. "Pack. We are driving you to your Aunt Julie's in Pennsylvania. You're going to live there." Aunt Julie? I hadn't seen Dad's sister in 5 years. They always called her and Uncle Ben dirt farmers and mocked their lifestyle. "That's 3 hours away. What about school? What about my job?" "You lost your job when you got arrested," my father said callously. "And we've already emailed the school that you're transferring due to behavioral issues. You're done here, Anthony." I walked into the house. Felt like walking into a stranger's home. I went to my room, grabbed the garbage bag, and started throwing in my clothes. I grabbed my textbooks, my few savings bonds I had from my grandmother, and a photo of me and my dog, Buster, who had passed away last year. When I came back downstairs, my mother was holding my cell phone. "I need that," I said. "Phones are for people who are part of this family," she said, and dropped it into her purse. "Julie and Ben don't have good reception anyway. You won't need it." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just punishment. This was an exile. They were scrubbing me from their lives. I was the stain on the perfect picture of the Stevens family, and they were bleaching me out. I got back into the car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look at Jackson's window, where I knew he was probably watching, peeking through the blinds, relieved that his shield had worked. The drive to Pennsylvania was the longest of my life. I sat in the back seat, watching the city lights fade into the darkness of the highway, then into the deep, inky black of the countryside. I felt small. I felt disposable. But as the sun began to rise over the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, something else began to bubble up inside me. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. Cold, hard rage. They thought they were burying me. They thought they were throwing me away like trash. They didn't realize they were planting a seed. The gravel crunching under the tires of my father's Mercedes was the only sound in the world. We pulled up to a farmhouse that looked nothing like the manicured colonial we lived in. It was a modest, white-clapboard house with a wraparound porch that needed a coat of paint. A massive barn stood to the side, and the smell of wet earth and livestock hit me the moment I opened the door. Uncle Ben and Aunt Julie were waiting on the porch. They looked tired, worn down by years of hard labor. But their eyes were different from my parents'. They were worried, yes, but they weren't cold. My father didn't even turn off the engine. He got out, popped the trunk, and dumped my black trash bag on the dirt. "Thanks for taking him," my father said to Uncle Ben, not offering a handshake. "He's lucky we didn't send him to juvenile detention." Maybe some hard work will straighten him out. Uncle Ben looked from the trash bag to me, then at his brother. He spat on the ground, missing my father's polished Italian leather shoes by an inch. We didn't take him to do you a favor, Richard. We took him because we aren't letting you throw a boy to the wolves. My mother didn't even get out of the car. She kept the window rolled up, staring straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the sister-in-law she deemed beneath her. Here are the transfer papers for the school district, my father said, shoving a manila envelope into Aunt Julie's hands. Don't expect checks. He's your problem now. If he steals anything, call the sheriff. He won't be stealing anything, Aunt Julie said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. Goodbye, Richard. My father got back in the car. He didn't say goodbye to me. He didn't look at me. He just put the car in reverse, spun the tires, and sped off down the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust that coated my clothes and tasted like ash. I stood there, clutching my bag, waiting for the lecture, waiting for Uncle Ben to tell me the rules, to tell me I was a burden, to tell me I better earn my keep. Instead, Aunt Julie walked down the steps and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a polite, stiff hug. It was a bone-crushing, desperate embrace. She smelled like flour and rain. I am so sorry, Anthony, she whispered. I am so sorry. I didn't cry. Couldn't. I was frozen. Life on the farm was hard, but it was honest. That was the first lesson I learned. There was no spin, no PR, no pretending. If you didn't feed the chickens, you didn't get eggs. If you didn't fix the fence, the cows got out. It was simple cause and effect, something my parents' house had never been. My room was small, up in the attic, but it had a window that looked out over the cornfields. For the first 2 weeks, I didn't speak much. I went to the new high school, kept my head down, and came home to work. I expected my parents to call. I expected them to check if I was alive. 1 week passed. 2 weeks. Nothing. One night, about a month in, I was helping Uncle Ben fix the tractor in the barn. My hands were covered in grease, my knuckles scraped and bleeding. Pass me the 5/8 wrench, Ben said from under the engine. I handed it to him. You got good hands, kid, he grunted. Better than your dad. He couldn't change a tire if his life depended on it. He pays people for that, I said quietly. Ben slid out from under the tractor and sat up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at me for a long moment. You know, Julie and we never could have kids. We wanted them. God had other plans. He paused. I know you didn't do what they said you did. I looked up, surprised. How do you know? They told you I was the ringleader. I know a thief when I see one, Ben said. And I know a liar. Your brother, Jackson? That boy has eyes that shift like a fox in a henhouse. You look people in the eye. You're angry, Anthony. You have every right to be. But you aren't crooked. That was the first time an adult male had ever validated me. Felt like a weight lifting off my chest. A few months later, the legal paperwork arrived. I came home from school to find Aunt Julie sitting at the kitchen table, crying. Uncle Ben was pacing the floor, his face red with fury. What happened? I asked, dropping my backpack. They sent the custody papers, Ben spat out. They aren't just letting you live here. They are terminating their guardianship. They are signing you over to us fully, so they aren't liable for any future criminal damages you might cause. I walked over and looked at the document. It was thick, full of legal jargon. Permanent transfer of guardianship. Release of liability. It was a business transaction. They weren't just sending me away. They were divorcing me. They wanted to make sure that if Jackson got in trouble again, or if I messed up, their assets, their precious house, their investments, their retirement funds, were untouchable by any lawsuits involving me. They threw me away, I said, my voice hollow. No, Aunt Julie said fiercely, grabbing my hand. No, Anthony. They lost you. There is a difference. And we found you. I signed the papers. I did it without hesitation. That night, lying in my attic room, I made a decision. I looked at the signature on the paper. Anthony Stevens. That name felt like a curse. It belonged to them. It belonged to the people who valued a varsity jacket over their own flesh and blood. I remembered my grandmother, my father's mother. She had passed away when I was 10. She was a Vance before she married my grandfather. She was a tough woman, a woman who came from nothing and built a life. She was the only one who ever stood up to my father. I vowed then and there that as soon as I turned 18, I would kill Anthony Stevens. I would become Anthony Vance. The next 2 years were a blur of work and study. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. to do chores, went to school, stayed late for the debate team, came home, did more chores and studied until midnight. I became obsessed with the law. I read every book in the local library about criminal justice. I wanted to understand the system that had allowed my parents to do this to me. I wanted to understand how to wield power so that no one could ever make me powerless again. I didn't have a phone, so I didn't see Jackson's social media. But news travels. I heard from a cousin that Jackson had gotten kicked off the football team for drinking. Then I heard he crashed the car my parents bought him. My parents covered it all up, of course. Checkbook parenting. When I graduated high school, I was valedictorian. My parents were invited. Aunt Julie sent the invitation with a handwritten note. They didn't come. Instead, I looked out into the crowd and saw Uncle Ben, wearing his one good suit that smelled like mothballs, and Aunt Julie, weeping into a handkerchief. They were clapping louder than anyone else. It rained that afternoon. After the ceremony, I stood in the parking lot with my diploma. Ben and Julie went to bring the truck around. I let the rain soak my gown. I let it wash away the last hope I had been secretly harboring, the stupid, childish hope that maybe, just maybe, my mother would show up in the back row. She didn't. I looked at the hills of Pennsylvania. I looked at my hands, calloused from farm work. Goodbye, Anthony Stevens, I whispered to the rain. I was going to college on a full academic scholarship. I was going to be a lawyer. And I was going to make sure that one day, when the world saw me, they wouldn't see the boy who was kicked out with a trash bag. They would see a force of nature. 13 years. That's how long it takes to build a fortress around your heart. I treated my life like a military campaign. College was the boot camp. Law school was the battlefield. I attended Penn State, then UPenn for law. I worked 2 jobs the entire time, bartending at night and clerking at a legal aid clinic during the day. I didn't party. I didn't date much. I had a singular focus: success. I changed my name legally on my 18th birthday. When the judge hit the gavel and declared me Anthony Vance, I felt lighter. I sent a copy of the court order to my parents' house. It was returned to sender, unopened. After law school, I didn't go for corporate law where the easy money was. I went into criminal defense, specifically focusing on juvenile cases and white-collar crime. A strange mix, people said, but it made perfect sense to me. I wanted to save the kids who were being railroaded, and I wanted to know exactly how the rich and corrupt hid their dirt. I was good, scary good. I had an instinct for finding the loose thread in a prosecutor's case and pulling until the whole thing unraveled. I became a junior partner at Harrison & Partners in Philadelphia by age 27. By 29, I was the youngest senior partner in the firm's history. My office was on the 40th floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I wore $3,000 suits. I drove an Audi R8. I had an apartment in Rittenhouse Square that cost more per month than my parents' mortgage. But I never forgot the farm. I sent Uncle Ben and Aunt Julie a check every month. Enough to fix the roof, enough to buy a new tractor, enough to hire help so Ben could rest his bad back. They tried to return it at first, but I told them it wasn't a gift. It was back payment for saving my life. I kept tabs on the Stevens family. Not directly, but through a private investigator I hired. Call it paranoia or call it knowing your enemy. The reports were satisfying in a dark way. Jackson had spiraled. Without me there to be the scapegoat, the family dynamic shifted. Jackson became the center of their universe, and he sucked them dry. He flunked out of college twice. He got a girl pregnant, married her, and got divorced 6 months later. A messy custody battle where my parents spent $50,000 on lawyers to try and get visitation rights for a grandchild they eventually ignored. Jackson never held a job for more than a year. My father, Richard, had to pull strings to get him into a mid-sized construction firm as a procurement manager. It was a job Jackson was woefully unqualified for, but nepotism is a powerful drug. Then came the big one. The investigator's report landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning. Subject: Jackson Stevens. Incident: embezzlement. Jackson hadn't just stolen petty cash this time. Over 2 years, he had funneled nearly $250,000 from the construction company into a shell account to fund his online gambling addiction and a lifestyle business that didn't exist. The construction company wasn't just firing him. They were pressing charges. Federal charges, wire fraud, embezzlement. And here was the kicker: my parents were broke. The investigator's notes were detailed. Richard and Eleanor had leveraged everything to keep up appearances. They had remortgaged the house to pay for Jackson's previous legal issues and his divorce. They had drained their retirement accounts to invest in Jackson's failed business ideas. They were living on credit cards and Social Security. They couldn't afford a high-powered defense attorney. And Jackson was looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I sat in my leather chair, looking at the photos of Jackson. He looked bloated, red-faced, terrified. He looked like his father. I swiveled my chair around to look at the city. I took a sip of my espresso. "Karma," I whispered. "You took your time, but you finally arrived." I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, clinical precision. This was a case. And for the first time in 13 years, the Stevens family was defenseless. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Sarah?" "Yes, Mr. Vance?" My paralegal answered. "Clear my schedule for Friday afternoon. I have a feeling we're going to get a call for a consultation. A big one. The biggest one of my life." I knew they would come to Harrison and Partners. We were the best in the state for financial crimes. I knew they would ask for the best lawyer available. I just had to wait for the phone to ring. The call came 2 days later. Sarah walked into my office, holding a tablet. She looked confused. "Anthony, I have a weird one for you." "Weird how?" I didn't look up from the contract I was redlining. "We have a couple on the line, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens. They are frantic. They insist on speaking to Mr. Vance. They said they were referred by a friend at the club who said you're the shark they need." I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper. Stevens. Hearing it spoken aloud in my sanctuary, my domain, felt like a violation. "Did you tell them my first name?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "No, I just said Mr. Vance is the head of the division." They didn't ask. They just kept talking about how they have assets, how money isn't an issue, though their credit check flagged immediately, by the way, and how their son is being framed by a corrupt company. "Framed," I repeated. "Of course. Do you want me to pass them to an associate? Their financials are shaky. We usually require a $50,000 retainer upfront for federal cases." I set the pen down. My hand was trembling slightly. I clenched it into a fist until the shaking stopped. This was it. This was the moment I had fantasized about 1,000 times in the dark of my attic room at the farm. "No," I said. "Book them. Friday at 2 p.m. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You want to take a low retainer case? That's not like you." "It's pro bono," I lied. "Or at least, it's a personal interest case." Sarah, who knew bits and pieces of my history but not the names, looked at me closely. She was sharp. She saw the tension in my jaw, the way a vein was pulsing in my temple. "Anthony," she said softly. "Stevens? Is this them?" I looked at her. Sarah was more than a paralegal. She was my right hand, and frankly, the closest thing I had to a friend in the city. "Yes." "Oh my God," she breathed. "Do they know?" "No. I changed my name before I even started law school. To them, Anthony Vance is a stranger. A savior." "You shouldn't do this," she said immediately. "Conflict of interest. Emotional distress. Anthony, let me send them away." "I need to see them, Sarah," I said, my voice hardening. "I need them to see me." I need to know that the ghost that has been haunting me is just a person. Just a sad old man and woman. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but I'll be in the room. Friday, 2 p.m. The next 24 hours were agonizing. I couldn't focus. I went to the gym and boxed until my knuckles were raw. I drove my car too fast on the highway at 3 a.m. I kept thinking about the boy with the trash bag. I kept thinking about the mother who chose a football season over her son's dignity. I wondered if they ever thought about me. Did they have a picture of me in the house? Or was it all Jackson? Friday arrived. I dressed with surgical precision. A charcoal gray bespoke suit, a silk tie, a watch that cost more than their car. I wanted to look like power. I wanted to look like the authority figure they had always pretended to be. At 1:55 p.m., the intercom buzzed. "Mr. and Mrs. Stevens are here," the receptionist said. "They are agitated. Send them to conference room B," I said. "The one with the glass walls." "Copy that." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the skyline of Philadelphia. I took a deep breath. Showtime. I walked down the hallway. I could see them through the glass walls of the conference room before they saw me. They were sitting at the long mahogany table. They looked small. My father, Richard, had lost most of his hair. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive from a distance but was frayed at the cuffs. He looked tired, his skin gray and pasty. My mother, Eleanor, had aged harder. She was wearing too much makeup, trying to cover deep lines of worry. She was clutching her handbag like a lifeline. She was looking around the office with a mix of awe and jealousy, taking in the expensive art, the view, the luxury. They were terrified. I could smell the fear on them even through the glass. I paused at the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You are Anthony Vance," I told myself. "You are the shark." I opened the door and walked in. They both stood up immediately, putting on their best respectable people masks. "Mr. Vance," my father said, extending a hand. "Thank you so much for seeing us. I'm Richard Stevens. This is my wife, Eleanor." I didn't take his hand. I walked past them to the head of the table and placed the file down. "Sit," I said. My voice was deeper than it was at 16. Cold. Professional. They hesitated, then sat. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? They hadn't seen me since I was a scrawny teenager in a hoodie. Now I was a broad-shouldered man with a beard and a different name. And besides, in their minds, Anthony Stevens was probably working at a gas station somewhere or in jail. He certainly wasn't this man. "We are in a terrible bind, Mr. Vance." My mother started, her voice trembling. "Our son, Jackson. He's a good boy. He's been targeted by his employers. They are jealous of his success, and they've fabricated these terrible lies about money missing." "Embezzlement?" I said, looking at the file, keeping my face hidden. $250,000. Wire fraud. That's not a misunderstanding, Mrs. Stevens. That's a systematic theft. It's a setup, my father insisted, slamming his hand on the table. "Jackson would never. He's a procurement manager. He handles millions. Why would he steal peanuts? Maybe because he has a gambling debt of $80,000? I asked, flipping a page. "And outstanding loans to 3 different sharks in Atlantic City?" They went silent. They stared at me. How do you know that?" my father whispered. "That's not in the police report." "I do my homework," I said. "I don't take losers, Mr. Stevens. And your son looks like a loser." "How dare you?" my mother gasped. "We came here for help, not to be insulted. We have money. We can pay whatever you want." "Do you?" I asked. "Because my credit check shows your house is underwater and your credit cards are maxed out." My father turned red. "Now see here. We are the Stevens family. We have standing in this community. Who do you think you are talking to?" I closed the file. The sound echoed in the room. "I think I'm talking to 2 people who have spent their entire lives lying to protect a criminal," I said. I stood up. I looked them dead in the eye. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but sweat beaded on my father's forehead. They looked at me, confused, searching my face for something familiar, but failing to find it through the lens of their own arrogance. "I beg your pardon?" my mother said, clutching her pearls. "Have we met at the club?" I let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. "The club? No, Eleanor. We didn't meet at the club." I walked slowly around the table. "Let me tell you a story. A story about a 16-year-old boy. He was a straight-A student. He worked at a hardware store. He saved every penny." My mother went still. Her eyes widened slightly. "One night," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, "his younger brother robbed a school, smashed a safe. The older brother ran to help him because he was taught that family protects family. And what did his parents do?" I stopped right behind my father's chair. I could see the scalp through his thinning hair. "They blamed the older brother. They told the police he was the bad seed. They put him in a car at 3 a.m. and dumped him at a farm like a bag of unwanted laundry. They took his phone. They took his home. They signed away their rights to him like he was a defective product." My father slowly turned his chair around. His face was a mask of horror. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "And Anthony," he whispered, came out as a squeak. My mother let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. She covered her mouth with both hands. She stared at me, really looked at me, stripping away the expensive suit and the beard, finally seeing the eyes of the boy she had betrayed. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Dad," I said. "Or should I say, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens?" "Oh my God," my mother sobbed. "Anthony, is it really you? You're a lawyer." "I am the senior partner," I corrected her. "I am the man you came to beg. I am the Mr. Vance you were hoping would save your golden child." "Vance," my father muttered. "Your grandmother's name. The only name in this family worth carrying," I snapped. My father stood up, his legs shaky. He tried to put on a smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Son, my God, look at you. We had no idea. We thought. You thought I was rotting in a ditch somewhere?" I finished for him. "Or working a minimum wage job." No. He tried to reach out and touch my shoulder. I took a step back, looking at his hand like it was covered in filth. "We always knew you had potential. We did. That's why we sent you to Julie's. Toughen you up. Look at you now. Success. Wealth." He gestured around the office. "We did this for you. It was tough love." I stared at him in disbelief. The audacity, the absolute, unadulterated narcissism. He was rewriting history in real time to make himself the hero of my success. "Tough love," I repeated quietly. "You abandoned me. You didn't call for 13 years. You didn't come to my graduation. You didn't care if I lived or died until you needed something. We were giving you space," my mother cried, standing up and reaching for me. "Anthony, please. We are family. Blood is thicker than water." "Blood," I said, "is just biology. Loyalty is family. And you have none." "But Jackson," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of fear. "Jackson is your brother. He's in trouble, Anthony. Serious trouble. You have to help him. You're the best. We heard you're the best. You can make this go away." "Make it go away," I repeated. "Just like you made the school break-in go away? Just like you made his DUIs go away? You've spent your whole life clearing the path for him, and that's why he's a criminal. You didn't raise a son. You raised a parasite. Don't speak about your brother that way," my father shouted, his old anger flashing back. "He made a mistake. He needs us. He needs consequences." I roared back. My voice echoed off the glass walls. Sarah flinched in the corner, but I didn't care. He stole $250,000. He destroyed people's livelihoods. And you want me to use my skill, my hard work, the career I built from the dirt up, to save him? Again? "You have to," my mother said, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Because if you don't, we will tell everyone. We will tell your partners, your clients, that you abandoned your family, that you let your own brother go to prison when you could have saved him. How will that look for your reputation, Mr. Vance? There it was. The blackmail. The true nature of the Stevens family. I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. I walked back to the table, picked up the file, and tossed it into the trash can. Go ahead, I said. Tell them. They blinked. What? Tell them, I said, leaning in close. Because here is what I am going to do. I am refusing this case. Conflict of interest. But more importantly, I am going to hand over every piece of evidence I have about Jackson's past crimes, the ones you covered up, to the prosecution. I'm going to make sure the judge knows exactly who Jackson is. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you are. You wouldn't, my father gasped. We are your parents. I have no parents, I said. I have an Aunt Julie and an Uncle Ben. You two are just the people who gave me up. I pressed the button on the intercom. Security to conference room B. I have two. Anthony, no, my mother shrieked. I will, I said. I have the receipts. This was the moment I had prepared for. The twist that they never saw coming. I didn't just have the investigation report on Jackson. I had kept everything from my childhood. I had the police report from when I was 16, which included witness statements that contradicted my parents' story. Statements the original officers ignored but were still on file. I had the transfer of guardianship papers where they listed irreconcilable behavioral issues as the reason for dumping me, alongside financial clauses protecting their assets. But the smoking gun was something the private investigator had found during the week of the smear campaign. Turned out Jackson wasn't just gambling the money away. He was transferring a portion of the embezzled funds into an account under the name R&E Consulting. Richard and Eleanor. My parents weren't just protecting Jackson. They were living off his stolen money. They knew he was stealing. They were complicit. They used that money to pay their mortgage, to lease their car, to keep up the charade of their life. I didn't go to the press. I went to the district attorney. I sat down with the prosecutor handling Jackson's case. I laid out the file. You're looking at Jackson Stevens for embezzlement, I said. But if you look at these transfers, you'll see he has accomplices. The prosecutor looked at the documents. Her eyes went wide. His parents. They knew, I said, and they spent the proceeds. The next morning, the police didn't just go for Jackson. They went to the Stevens household. I wasn't there, but I heard about it. It was 6 a.m. A raid. They seized the computers, the financial records, and the leased Mercedes. The headline the next day wasn't "Heartless Lawyer Abandons Family." It was "Family Crime Ring. Parents and Son Indicted in $250,000 Embezzlement Scheme." The public opinion flipped instantly. The comments on social media changed from "What a terrible son" to "He escaped a toxic cult." Jackson pleaded guilty almost immediately to get a reduced sentence. He got 8 years. He turned on our parents to shave off time, testifying that they pressured him to steal to maintain their lifestyle. My parents were charged with conspiracy and receiving stolen property. Because of their age and lack of prior record, they avoided prison time, but they lost everything. The house was foreclosed to pay restitution. Their accounts were frozen. Their reputation at the country club, the only thing they ever truly cared about, was incinerated. I sat in my office a month later, reading the final report. They were living in a small rental apartment in a bad part of town, surviving on basic social security. Sarah walked in with a cup of coffee. "It's over," she said softly. "It's over," I agreed. "Do you feel bad?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about the boy on the porch in Pennsylvania. I thought about Aunt Julie hugging me. I thought about the garbage bag. "No," I said. "I feel vindicated." I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote a check for a substantial amount. "Send this to Aunt Julie," I said. "Tell her to buy that neighboring plot of land she always wanted. Tell her the harvest came in early this year." I spun my chair around to look at the city one last time. The storm was over. The sun was coming out. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely Anthony Vance. The sound of a judge's gavel is usually sharp, a punctuation mark ending a sentence. But when Judge Miller brought it down on Jackson's case, it sounded like a crumbling wall. The wall that had separated my family from reality for 13 years had finally collapsed. I sat in the back of the federal courtroom. I wasn't there as a lawyer. I was there as a member of the public. I watched the back of my parents' heads. They were sitting in the second row, slumped over. They weren't holding hands. They looked like two strangers waiting for a bus in the rain. Jackson stood before the bench. He wasn't wearing his varsity jacket or the Italian suits my father used to buy him. He was in an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was greasy and flat. He looked small. He looked like exactly what he was. A 27-year-old man who had never been told no until the FBI kicked down his door. "Mr. Stevens," Judge Miller said, peering over his glasses, "you have pleaded guilty to wire fraud and embezzlement. You stole from the very people who gave you a chance. And in your testimony, you admitted that a portion of these funds went to maintaining your parents' lifestyle." Jackson nodded. He didn't look at our parents. In fact, his defense strategy had been the final knife in their backs. To get a lighter sentence, Jackson's public defender had painted Richard and Eleanor as the masterminds, claiming Jackson was pressured into financial crimes to pay off their debts. The golden child had cannibalized his creators to save his own skin. It was poetic, in a dark, twisted way. "I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison," the judge declared, followed by 3 years of supervised release. "You are also ordered to pay full restitution." There were no gasps, no dramatic outcries, just a heavy, suffocating silence. My mother didn't cry. She just stared at the floor. She knew there was no money for restitution. The house was already gone. I stood up and walked out before the bailiffs led Jackson away. I didn't need to see him in handcuffs again. I had seen that image enough in my nightmares, except in my dreams, it was me. I walked out into the crisp autumn air of Philadelphia. The city looked brighter. The noise of the traffic sounded like music. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I had memorized but rarely called during the workday. "Hello," a gruff. Instead, I drove 3 hours west, into the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, looking out at the changing leaves. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free." When we pulled up to the farm, the transformation was evident. The check I had sent, the harvest money, had been put to good use. The barn had a new metal roof gleaming in the sunset. The fences were repaired. There was a new tractor parked by the shed. But the house was exactly the same. The same peeling white paint, the same porch swing, the same smell of wood smoke. Uncle Ben and Aunt Julie were waiting. This time, there was no awkwardness. Aunt Julie rushed down the steps and nearly tackled me. She held me like I was still that 16-year-old boy with the trash bag, trying to shield me from the world. "Look at you," she said, pulling back and cupping my face. "You look tired, Anthony." "Lawyers are always tired, Aunt Julie." I smiled. "This is Sarah." Sarah, who was used to high-rise boardrooms and corporate sharks, looked instantly at ease. She shook Ben's hand and hugged Julie. "It's so nice to finally meet the people who made Anthony who he is," Sarah said. That sentence hung in the air. The people who made Anthony who he is. She didn't mean my biological parents. She meant the people who taught me integrity. Dinner that night was pot roast and mashed potatoes. We sat at the scarred oak table in the kitchen. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, silent dinners of my childhood, where my mother would criticize my table manners and my father would check his stocks on his BlackBerry. Here there was laughter. There was noise. Ben told stories about the neighbors. Julie interrogated Sarah about city life. Halfway through the meal, Ben put his fork down and looked at me. "We heard about the trial," he said quietly. The table went quiet. "It's done," I said. "Jackson got 8 years." "And Richard and Eleanor?" Julie asked. They lost the house. They're filing for bankruptcy. They'll probably move into a subsidized apartment in Jersey. They avoided jail time because they turned over evidence on Jackson's other associates. But they are ruined. Ben nodded slowly. He took a sip of his iced tea. You know, when they dropped you off here, your daddy told me I was inheriting a burden. He said you were rotten. I looked down at my plate. Even now, the words stung. I watched you for 13 years, Ben continued. I watched you wake up before the sun. I watched you study until your eyes were red. I watched you send us money when you barely had enough for rent in the city. He reached across the table and put his rough, calloused hand over mine. You aren't the rotten one, Anthony. You're the best crop this family ever raised. And I thank God every day they were stupid enough to throw you in our field. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and tight. I looked at Sarah, and she was wiping a tear from her eye. I looked at Julie, who was beaming with pride. In that moment, the final shackle broke. I realized I had been waiting for an apology from people who were incapable of giving it. I had been waiting for validation from Richard and Eleanor. But I didn't need it. I had it right here. I had it in the calloused hand of a dirt farmer and the tearful smile of his wife. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't an exile. I was a son, just not theirs. The next morning I woke up early, out of habit. I walked out to the barn. The air was cold and sharp. I watched the sunrise over the cornfields. I thought about the trajectory of my life. From the back of a police cruiser to the corner office of a law firm. It was a long road. I pulled out my phone. I had one last loose end to tie up. I opened my banking app. I had set up a small, automated transfer the night before. It wasn't for my parents. It was a college fund for my niece, Jackson's daughter from his brief, disastrous marriage. My parents had ignored her because her mother wasn't status enough. Jackson had ignored her because he was selfish. I wouldn't ignore her. I wouldn't let the cycle continue. I set up a trust that she could access when she turned 18, provided she maintained a certain GPA. I named the trust the Second Chance Fund. I walked back to the house. The smell of bacon and coffee was wafting from the kitchen. Sarah was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, holding 2 mugs. Coffee? She asked. Please. She handed me the mug. You look different this morning. Yeah. You look lighter. I feel lighter, I admitted. I think I'm finally ready to drop the case. What case? She asked, confused. Jackson's case is over. No, I said, looking out at the horizon. The case of the people versus Anthony Stevens. I've been prosecuting myself for 13 years, wondering if I really was the bad influence, wondering if I deserved what happened. Today, I'm dismissing the charges. Sarah smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. About time, counselor. We stayed at the farm for 3 days. When we drove back to Philadelphia, I didn't feel like I was returning to a battlefield. I felt like I was just going to work. The anger that had fueled me for over a decade, the high-octane rage that pushed me to work 18-hour days, was gone. It was replaced by a calm, steady ambition. I wasn't working to prove them wrong anymore. I was working because I was good at it, and because there were other kids out there, other 16-year-olds in hoodies sitting in the back of police cars, who needed someone to believe them. 1 year later, success, I've learned, is quiet. Drama is loud. Chaos is loud. But true success is the ability to sit in a room and not feel the need to shout your existence to the world. My life had settled into a rhythm I loved. I was managing partner of the Criminal Defense Division now. Sarah and I had moved in together. We were talking about getting a dog. Maybe a golden retriever, something happy and uncomplicated. I hadn't heard from my parents in 12 months. I knew through the grapevine that they were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. My father was working as a greeter at a big box store. My mother was reportedly trying to sell cosmetics online. It was a steep fall from the country club, but it was a life they could sustain if they were humble. I assumed they were too proud to ever contact me again. I assumed the shame of the courtroom was enough to keep them away. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in November. It was raining, that cold, biting Philadelphia rain that cuts right through your coat. I was walking to my car in the underground garage of the firm. The concrete echoed with my footsteps. As I approached my spot, I saw a figure standing by the pillar next to my car. My hand instinctively went to the pepper spray on my keychain, a habit from dealing with desperate clients. But as I got closer, the figure stepped into the light. It was my mother. She looked frail. The woman who used to terrorize waitstaff if her salad dressing was on the wrong side of the plate was gone. In her place was an old woman in a wet raincoat that looked 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once dyed a fierce blonde, was gray and pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing makeup. I stopped 10 feet away. "Anthony," she said. Her voice was thin, raspy. "Eleanor," I replied. I couldn't call her mom. That word didn't fit anymore. She flinched at the use of her first name. She clutched her purse with both hands. A cheap, knockoff bag, not the designer leather she used to flaunt. I didn't know if you'd be working late," she said. "I've been waiting for 2 hours. What do you want?" I asked. I didn't offer to let her into the car. I didn't offer her an umbrella. She looked down at her shoes. They were soaked. "Your father, he's sick. His blood pressure, the stress. The medication is expensive, Anthony. Medicare doesn't cover all of it. And the rent? They raised the rent." She looked up at me, her eyes watery. "We're drowning." I looked at her. I looked for the anger, the rage that used to consume me. I waited for my heart to race, for my fists to clench. But there was nothing. No anger, no hate, just pity. A deep, distant pity, like you feel when you see a stranger's car broken down on the side of the highway. "And Jackson?" I asked. "Have you asked him for help?" She let out a bitter laugh. "He calls collect from prison every week asking for money for the commissary. He blames us. He says we didn't hire a good enough lawyer. He had the best lawyers money could buy for his whole life," I said. "Look where it got him." "Anthony, please." She stepped forward, reaching a hand out but stopping short of touching me. "I know we hurt you. I know we made mistakes. But we are old. We are your parents. Just a few $1,000s. To get us through the winter. Please. You have so much." "I have so much because I worked for it," I said calmly. "I have so much because when you threw me out with a trash bag, I didn't curl up and die. I built something." "I know," she sobbed. "I know. And I'm sorry. I got into the car and closed the door. The sound was solid, final. I started the engine. Through the rain-slicked window, I saw her standing there, holding the business card, looking small and defeated in the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. I backed out and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. As I drove out of the garage and into the rainy streets of Philadelphia, a song came on the radio. It was upbeat, something full of life. I turned the volume up. I thought about the question people often ask victims of family trauma. Can you ever really heal? The answer is yes. But healing isn't about fixing the people who broke you. It's not about getting the apology you deserve. It's about building a life so full, so loud, so beautiful, that you can't hear the ghosts anymore. My parents wanted a golden child. They got one. They created a statue of gold. And like all idols, it was hollow, and it crushed them when it fell. I was the stone they rejected, the unpolished, rough rock they threw into the field. But stone endures. Stone builds foundations. And on that stone I built a castle. I arrived home. The lights of my apartment were warm and inviting. I could see Sarah's silhouette in the window. I parked the car, took a deep breath of the cold, wet air, and smiled. I was home, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. So what can we learn from my journey? The biggest lesson here is about boundaries. Many of you watching this might be holding onto toxic relationships because of blood or obligation. You might think you have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't. You have the right to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they gave birth to you. Success and peace are the best revenge, but they are also the best cure. Now, I want to hear from you. What is your biggest takeaway from this story? Do you think I was too harsh on my mother in the parking garage? Or was it the necessary final boundary? Drop a good in the comments if you agree with the lessons the story taught, or share your own experience with overcoming family expectations. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you define your own worth. Don't let anyone else hold the pen to your life script.